For more on what is happening, the Department of Justice, Harry Litman, former U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania, and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Clinton Department of Justice, and Mimi Rocah, former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, now an MSNBC legal analyst. Harry is someone who is at the DOJ, who I've talked to a lot about William Barr and the role he has here. It just seems to me there are really basic questions that William Barr needs to answer one way or the other through his own mouth in front of reporters about what role he played or did not play in this whole thing.
He needs to, but he doesn't want to, and I think he won't unless he's really dragged in. You're right. I mean, this would be flagrantly improper for him to have gotten involved, even without it being a nefarious criminal conspiracy, just for him to be kibitzing in this kind of, foreign policy led by Rudy Giuliani. But we know that he really, as you say, has been willing to push the envelope, shred the envelope in terms of what he did with the Mueller report. So is this just a bridge too far for him? It seemed to me, interestingly, Chris, that Trump didn't have quite the same tone he had with Sessions, where he was really bitter. And Trump is the guy who somehow revealed that Barr wouldn't do this. Something's a little bit odd and doesn't quite add up to it. But I think, Barr knows that it would be personal suicide or perilous for him to be dragged into the impeachment now. There's no end to that road.
It's very clear the Department of Justice wants to have nothing to do with it. They've put out a bunch of statements. They've distanced themselves from certain things. At one point, when someone testified about there being a joint, investigation that the Department of Justice and the Ukrainian government would do, they said we didn't know anything about that if that existed. Yep. I guess the question is it plausible or tenable for Barr to maintain silence and put out statements distancing himself without some sort of full accounting from DOJ?
It shouldn't be. I mean, this is crazy, actually. What you just laid out, right? There was like 5 questions. Did Bill Barr talk to the president? Did he follow, before that phone call, did he know Trump was using his name? Did he have a conversation with the president of Ukraine? Those are questions that should be asked by people investigating what happened with Ukraine, whether it be people in Congress, the impeachment committee, or the Southern District of New York, assuming, which I think we all rightly assume, that Giuliani's case or investigation there ties into this. So Barr is a witness and not a peripheral witness. He is someone that needs to be asked questions and give truthful answers, probing questions. I
mean, I just want to be clear. It's entirely possible as a story here. The president did just throw this out and didn't check with Barr, that Barr had nothing to do with it, that he was just being invoked because that's what the president wanted to invoke. Yeah. I just like to know one way or the other as a factual matter. Right. The other thing here is about the role. I mean, Giuliani and the George Kent testimony, we're going to get into that a little bit. But, there's one theme here in this testimony. There was an extensive attempt to extort Ukraine. It almost worked, and Giuliani was running point on it for the president. Giuliani saying this yesterday, I've been thinking about what this means all day. I want to get both your feedback. The investigation I conducted concerning 2016 Ukrainian collusion corruption was done solely as a defense attorney to defend my client against false charges that kept changing as one after another were disproven. What does that mean? And what does Giuliani's relationship to the president mean in a legal or even constitutional sense as we enter this impeachment?
So talk about changing explanations. It's Giuliani's. Before he was rooting out corruption in favor of him. What he's trying to do there is make a play for privilege.
Yes.
But I think it won't work. And boy, is he tailor-made to be the number 2 villain here. It's not just that he's unlikable and sinister. The fact that he's there makes it so clear that, of course, he's acting for Trump's personal interests and not for any broader anti-corruption in Ukraine. So he's front and center, and they've got the pincer on him in a way they don't with other witnesses because, as Mimi says, SDNY is clearly making him a subject, and now Congress is as well. And he is really fit to, I mean, there are very few, it seems to me, good strategies for the White House at this point. But one of them might be throw Rudy from the train, because there is that final communication between him and Trump is not very clear. But we know everything that Rudy was doing, and it's all nasty and corrupt, without a doubt.
That is a very good point. I also wonder about the privilege play here, and this is kind of a technical legal question, but I'm interested in it. I mean, there's a sort of tradition of like the mob lawyer, right? And like the mob lawyer is a lawyer, but also kind of an advisor, and the benefit you get from that is that legally that's all privileged stuff, and so you've got a privilege claim.
Or they think it's legal.
Well, right, exactly. They think, right.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that the Giuliani's a mob lawyer. What I'm saying here is that him calling himself the president's lawyer while not doing anything that we would call legal work per se seems to me a play to sort of put this in the penumbra of privilege. Yeah. And I just wonder, like, can that hold up?
Look, not if it's tested in a court, I think, right? It's just like remember when Michael Cohen's office was raided and Trump had that day and said, well, you know, attorney-client privilege, this is an attack on it. And Republicans all day were, this is crazy. How many of those documents ended up being privileged when a judge reviewed them? Like 10, you know, I mean, a very small amount.
You're right. That's right. They had a whole process to sort them.
Exactly. So I mean, if you get a judge, if you get a neutral observer looking or neutral, decision maker who knows the law and really understands what the very important principle of attorney-client privilege actually is about, this is a facade. And Rudy Giuliani's been doing this for years. I mean, he's been going out on TV. He's been a spokesperson, not a lawyer.
Right.
I mean, yes, he advised him on Mueller, but you can have more than one role, right? He was giving the president advice, but half the things he was doing on TV were about putting out talking points, taking the sting out, things like that. And everything he's done with Ukraine, I mean, he can say it's as a lawyer, but just labeling it, that doesn't make it. He was a de facto Secretary of State. I don't know.
That's my point. I mean, the other thing is, like, the president has a legal team. He's in court all the time. There are some real highly paid, very adept lawyers defending him in court. Rudy Giuliani is not doing that, notably. Mimi Rocah and Harry Litman. Thank you both. Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.